Okay, let's get started for the first session this morning. So we'll have Clément Moulin-Frier, who will talk to us about flow Lenia and the different self-organization of ecosystems in it. And just because all of the people participating had to send us their birth date, it's actually Clément's birthday, so happy birthday. What do you Okay, yeah, take it away.
To keep this hidden. It's not the type of age you celebrate. All right. So thank you, Vasily, for the introduction, and for Vasily and Barbara also for the organization of this really cool event. So before showing what we do in the topic of self-organizing agents of ecosystem in the Flower Group, as proposed by the organizers, I will say a few words about my journey in artificial life. It was actually an interesting exercise because I have not only done artificial life during my career, and this journey is quite entangled, let's say, with my journey to cognitive modeling and artificial intelligence. But as far as I remember, it started with this device, Texas Instrument 89, where I did my first programming trials on this back in high school in the late 90s. And as far as I remember as well, but these memories are quite blurry, I have a vague memory of trying to do a sort of genetic algorithm a bit like this. In my memory, the number I was trying to find was 72. I don't know why, but basically having a population of points between 0 and 100, and then selecting the ones that are closer from 72, mutating them a bit, and see if it converges to something. I have a vague memory of this. Then I remember as well that later on I saw an article in a pop science newspaper about Wolfram 1D cellular automata, and that I also program it on this device. It's quite easy to program, and that I was quite interested by this intriguing emerging complexity. Then I became quite interested in multi-agent systems actually during my master degree, and I did a PhD in the self-organization of speech among interacting agents. So this is, for example, how agents can, through their interaction and with objects, self-organize the phonological systems. These are basically the three vowels E, U, A, and E, in order to communicate about those subjects. These were agents equipped with a computer model of the human vocal tract, actually. Then I also did something I did quite a few papers related to what we called at the time developmental robotics, so cognitive models of cognitive development, which is not really maybe life-oriented, but still this is a view of self-organized cognition. So in my opinion, it's actually a bit related to some principles of artificial life, at least. Then during a postdoc also in Barcelona, I was integrating with people that were interested in consciousness, which at the time thought was quite an irrelevant topic because we did not know how to define consciousness. And then I became interested in open-endedness. So then I thought, okay, actually you can study a concept that you cannot define, so that's fine. And also with my colleague Marty Sanchez, we started to think about if we could train reinforcement learning agents, multiple reinforcement learning agents, in environments that are driven by cellular automata dynamics. So we started with actually trying to train agents to forage for alive cells in the game of life, which was working pretty badly because the game of life is very unstable. And then we discussed with Ricard Solé, actually also in Barcelona at the time, who recommended us to actually use other types of cellular automata, in particular forest fire cellular automata, that are much easier to train agents to forage for trees, for example, in this type of automata than in the game of life. So we ended up with a cool paper actually about this, which should be online. We don't see it yet, but basically each agents learn how to maximize the number of trees on the map while limiting fire propagation. And then I started like hardcore artificial life, let's say, when I came to Flowers, when I came back to the Flowers group in Bordeaux working with Pierre Boudeye in 2019. And I remember I was having like a visio with Pierre, who was telling me he was starting to work with a system called Lenia that I did not know at the time. And it was the time when we were actually developing this, so I had a renewed interest in cellular automata. So this basically convinced me to apply the permanent researcher in this team, and I was lucky enough to get the position and start to work with Mayalen, who was in, I think, doing a master internship at the time or something like this there. And so we started to apply what we called automated discovery algorithms. I will explain a bit what this means later in order to explore the parameter of the behavior space of Lenia, and then to do other type of work, for example, flow Lenia type of simulation that I will explain also a bit in the talk. So nowadays, I'm most interested, as I think quite a few of us here, in what we could call open-endedness. It's hard to define. We usually use this definition, but that's obviously discussable and quite vague. As often with this type of concept, the open-endedness is something that you know it's here when you see it, basically. And basically, you can see it in biological evolution, developmental skill acquisition, or cultural evolution, that indeed all seems to have this tendency to generate increasingly diverse and complex structures, for example, organismal, or cognitive, or behavioral, or cultural, or social structures. I like to think about open-endedness, let's say, as major transitions, as proposed by Bernard Smith, that are like transitions that involve formerly free-living entities that at some point transition and coalesce to larger groups, giving rise to like higher levels of organization. For example, the transition from biology, chemistry from physics and chemistry, to biology, or the transitions from organisms that are mostly driven, let's say, by like gene regulations in order to drive their behavior, to organisms that actually can acquire some abilities for like in-life learning, for example, or also how groups of developmental agents can at some point trigger a new Darwinian process by socially transmitting skills and knowledge among generations in a cumulative manner. That is cultural evolution. And so we usually approach these transitions with typical computer scientist approach, mixing methods from artificial life and artificial intelligence. So related to the question of the origins of life, we obviously use cellular automata as nice, let's say, general models of self-organization. And we attempt to explore the behavior space of such systems using what we call automated discovery algorithms. I highly recommend the PhD studies of Mayalen on this topic, which explains very well all the ideas behind this kind of setup. And we look for parameters in cellular automata, for example, in Lenia, that can, for example, give rise to what we could call a sensory motor agent, whatever this means, or also emergent evolution. Regarding developmental adaptation, this is a bit out of scope of the topic today, but just to say a few words about it, we usually rely on methods such as neuroevolution or meta-reinforcement learning as interesting models of how evolution can interact with development, and multi-agent reinforcement learning as a model of how agents can collectively learn behaviors despite converging or competing interests. For example, we do this type of large-scale evolutionary simulations that we call non-episodic neuroevolution, where we continually evolve agents controlled by neural networks in large environments without any rosette of the population or the environment. This is also a contribution where we use multi-agent meta-reinforcement learning to study conditions that could favor the emergence of collective exploration strategies. And regarding cultural evolutions, we do different stuff. We also use LLMs for this. But in some contributions, we use what we call autotelic reinforcement learning, that are basically reinforcement learning agents that are able to self-generate their own goals and reward functions in order to study how groups of such agents can, for example, acquire some sort of shared intentionality that is a way to align their goal toward common objectives. We also have some contributions related to collective innovation, studying conditions, for example, in terms of topology of social networks that could favor collective innovations in a group of agents in environments that rely on like combining elements to create new ones, a bit like Little Alchemy 2 or Minecraft is also an example of such environments. So today I will mostly focus on this left column, but just to, well, if you are interested by the other parts, there is a link to my Google Scholar there. And so I borrowed this slide, or I adapted it from actually my thesis defense, but just to say that as commonplace, we approach the origins of life as a self-organization phenomena. And self-organization is an interesting concept here because it is present both in the inorganic world, for example, how water molecules self-organize into snowflakes, and also in the living world, for example, how cells self-organize into organs or organisms. And so it seems interesting to study the origins of life under the lens of self-organization, where basically the question boils down to how self-organized matter in the organic world can transition at some point toward self-organized matter that we could call organic, or that at least displays some features of life. What is nice about self-organization also is that it is very easy to simulate it on computer, typically with cellular automata, but not only. And so this basically is interesting for a computer scientist because then you can study these fascinating questions with the tools you master. So then studying this type of questions with the computational methods entails at least two main challenges. First one is how can we simulate complex systems that have the potential to self-organize structures that are relatively complex and could exhibit some features of life. So I'm not going to repeat what is the game of life here, but basically it's just that you can formally see it as a recurrent convolutional network. So typically in the game of life, counting the number of neighboring alive cells is a convolution operation, and then making a decision on the next state of the middle cells correspond to, I think, the results of this convolution to a nonlinear function. And so basically the proposition of Lenia by Bert some years ago correspond to generalizing these concepts to arbitrary large neighborhood, convolutional kernels of arbitrary shapes, multidimensional homogeneous states, as well as what Bert called gross functions of also arbitrary shape. So this gives rise to interesting emerging complexities, like for example solitons that move in an environment, or also this type of more diffuse Turing patterns. And so what is nice with Lenia is that actually this is a class of cellular automata, in the sense that it is parameterized, and actually some of these parameters correspond to the game of life itself. And so by exploring this parameter space, you can actually generate quite diverse structures. So this is an example of 100 random parameters in Lenia that we see a rollout in each of these 10 by 10 grid. And indeed, we see that it generates quite diverse dynamics. So Lenia is, let's say, a good starting point for this first challenge. But then the second challenge is how we can efficiently explore the space of behaviors of just complex systems. So as any dynamical system, complex system take as input the parameters, for example, parameters of Lenia. We perform a rollout of the system, and then we get a sequence of states as an output observation. The problem is that the mapping between these input parameters and these output observations is usually quite complex and nonlinear. In particular, you often end up with very large regions of the parameter space that map to a tiny region of the outcome space, or even the same point actually in this space. And on the contrary, you can get very tiny regions of the parameter space that can display actually a lot of variability. And actually interesting behaviors of the system might end up in this tiny region. So the question is how you can find them. To illustrate this, for example, this is the same simulation like before, so 100 different random parameters in Lenia. We see that a majority of them actually give rise to no activation at all, or just dying patterns. So the same points typically in the outcome space, more or less. And also that some of them actually resemble each other, also relatively resemble each other. So this is to overcome this type of problem that we develop what we call automated discovery algorithms. So in that very general form, basically these are just machine learning models that observe outputs of a complex systems and can propose input parameters to these systems with the objective to maximize output diversity. So we are working on a class of such automated discovery algorithm that we call intrinsically motivated goal exploration processes, or IMGEP. The mechanics of it is actually pretty simple. It corresponds to basically, so we consider a space of behaviors of these systems that we can handcraft, or in some cases also we can learn it. But for example, one could consider that an interesting behavior space for such systems are, for example, the number of spatially localized patterns and their speed or their directions, for example. It could be whatever else depending on what you want to find in the system. And so the idea is to generate a goal in this behavior space. A simple solution is just to, for example, sample it randomly in this space, and then to infer input parameters that could potentially reach this goal. So at the beginning, you have no data about the system, so you don't know anything about it. So you will mostly do a random guess, and so you might end up in with an actual behavior which is quite different from the one you were targeting. But by repeating this process over and over, you can refine an inverse model basically from the behaviors to the input parameters. And we can show that in most complex systems, actually, this procedure results in discovering much more diversity. This is a diversity measure in this space, basically, than, for example, a naive random parameter search method.
Is it called intrinsically motivated? What is intrinsic?
Yeah, so actually these are algorithms that originally comes from the field of developmental robotics. And so originally they were proposed to model child development. So actually if you, they were basically trying to model this type of behavior. So if you take a baby, like a little kid, you place it in a room, there is no adults around, it is not hungry, not thirsty, usually it doesn't stay still. Okay. There's a lot of stuff, and this behavior seems to be structured, not random at all, otherwise it would be mostly some sort of random motion. You also do dangerous stuff, like putting the finger in the plug, like this, for example. And so Pierre Vaudeye, with the head of the Flowers group, like maybe 20-25 years ago, started to propose with a colleague of him, which is actually at EPFL now, Frédéric Kaplan, algorithms that could model this type of behavior and also implement them in machines, in robots at the time, actually, like physical robots, like the Sony Aibo, for example. And these algorithms are based on the same principles, basically. Like, you take whatever robot, and this robot can self-generate a goal, position in the environment, then infer parameters of controllers to try to reach that goal, and you iterate. And same thing, you observe that usually you can reach a much wider diversity in behavior space that you would do by just randomly babbling with your controllers.
But so the actual goal of the robot or the system is to be as diverse as possible in this.
Mostly,
the
yeah.
Extrinsic goal is diversity, and then
intrinsic in the sense that it's internally generated.
Okay.
So this comes from the literature in cognitive psychology, or developmental psychology, basically, that makes the difference between extrinsic motivations, that are motivations where you directly try to maximize some sort of extrinsic reward, for example, finding food, versus intrinsic motivations. For example, this little kid here with is not looking for food or for nothing extrinsic. It seems to be intrinsically motivated by something, and the idea is what? Well, the question is what is it interesting in? Yeah.
And these sort of intrinsically motivated robotic models, have there been attempts to also model like a notion of boredom? Like once it's modeled like the world around it, and it pretty much knows the distribution, and it finds no surprising rewards anymore, it sort of like gets bored and then just goes and does even more extreme stuff?
Yeah, what is not interesting can be considered as boring, yeah. Actually, they were pretty much inspired by the flow theory from an Hungarian psychologist in the 80s that I never know how to pronounce the name, but it starts with a C. And the flow theory is basically a theory of fun and boredom, if you want. So you have two axes typically, which are the challenges the challenges basically and the capacity of the agent or his perceived capacity to resolve these challenges. And the idea is that interesting activities are those that are somewhere in the middle when you have, or those where you have like high challenges but high perceived skills, basically. Or you can enter in this state of flow that we know well as programmers usually. It's 5 in the morning and it was not planned like this. So yeah, this is why they are called intrinsically motivated goal exploration process, which indeed in artificial life applications might not seem very natural. Okay. So yeah, basically they are, let's say, algorithms that are quite efficient at maximizing diversity in behavior space in a sample efficient manner. When basically the number of samples you can rollout you can do with the system is limited to simulate. And then there are many variants of this type of algorithms. For example, Mayalen developed the in-depth architecture that enables to actually learn the behavior space online in a hierarchical manner. So yes, there are tons of variants.
So just another question. In this case, what does it mean for two behaviors to be different if defined a priori? Give a metric of difference behaviors?
How do you measure diversity in behavior space, you mean, for example?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, we do it quite naively, actually. There are different methods, but a very common one is to, for example, measure the sum of squared distances from all points. Or you can also like discretize the space and count the number of bins that are attained, this kind of thing. Okay. Which indeed depends on how you weight each dimension, etc. So yeah.
And for Lenia, the output behavior would be just the frame after a certain number of time steps, or do you have some qualitative?
So there are different choices here. I will present a few later on, but you can have, for example, measures of how a given pattern behaves. For example, its speed, or you can have more like system-wide metrics. For example, some sort of measured entropy in the entire grid through time and space. So there are different choices. You can also learn it. You can also use pre-trained model to as a proxy to a behavior space. I will also present something later on about this. So yeah, I will show you a few choices after. Okay, well actually this is the outline of the contributions I want to show today. So they are mostly all based on this type of automated discovery algorithm, in particular this type of MJEP, that we apply to Lenia or variants thereof. And so the first contribution I will show is what we call sensory motor Lenia, where we explore the parameter space of Lenia in order to find patterns that we could qualify as sensory motor agents. We'll also precise a bit what we mean by sensory motor agents in this case. Then I will present Flow Lenia, that has been mentioned also yesterday a couple of times, which is basically a mass conservative extension of Lenia that enables parameter localization, so basically parameters of the update rule able to flow with the matter it is attached to. That can result in this type of relatively large-scale ecosystemic simulations. Then we will apply automated discovering algorithms to Lenia in order to discover a space of what we ambitiously call Lenia universes. So, for example, in this figure, each small square is a simulation a bit like this one. And finally, we'll present also a recent work where we couple this type of automated discovery algorithms with vision language models in order to, let's say, discover some sort of uncharted territory in this behavior space that would be hard to find with more classical methods, like the ones I just mentioned before. So let's go with the first one, discovering sensory motor agency. So when you think of sensory motor agents, usually, or at least myself, I think about it more in the let's say, a mechanistic view of cognitions, where an agent is well separated from its environment and interact with this with well-defined sensors and actuators and make decisions with a well-defined decision center, a brain, so to speak, implemented, for example, with natural or biological or artificial neurons. So this is a view which is dominant, for example, in cognitive science or in neuroscience or in artificial intelligence. This contrasts with the enactivist view of cognition that were well popularized by Maturana and Varela in the 80s, where here there is no predefined notion of agent embodiment, but instead, in this enactivist view, cognition must emerge from the interaction, microscopic interaction between atomic elements. And so the sensory motor agents must come to existence by itself without being pre-specified. And so an interesting question here is, in which conditions some part of an environment could self-organize as what we could call the sensory motor agent. And in this work, what we consider a sensory motor agent is basically a pattern, in the cellular automata sense, let's say, that can self-constitute its own morphology, self-maintain its own individuality, and exhibit some sort of behavioral functionality in an environment. So to find such patterns in Lenia, we rely again on this automated discovery framework, and we consider special parametrization of Lenia, let's say, with two channels. One channel is a fixed channel with fixed parameters, and it basically corresponds to, well, you can imagine it as a field of obstacles. So they are like fixed dots in a grid that basically don't move. Then we have a second channel, this yellow one, where we can simulate any type of patterns. And so this one has three parameters that we can explore. And the interaction between the two channels is that when they overlap, the blue channel will destroy the activation in the yellow channel. Then we explore the parameter space of the system, so basically the parameters of this yellow channel, using the similar procedure as I described before, where we first select a goal. Here the goal takes the form of a target position in the grid. And so we start with an initial pattern, like for example a randomly initialize a square like this, with the goal to reach this randomly generated position with a random field of obstacles.
By destroy the activation, do you mean it zeroes out the convolution, or it like feeds a negative growth to the yellow channel?
That's a good question. I would say a negative growth.
Yeah, but it's equivalent basically. It triggered a very negative growth in the direct neighbors of the obstacles,
okay,
which would be kind of equivalent of directly removing activation on those areas.
Yeah.
Because of the clip.
Which is maybe actually this growth function. No? Kind of, yeah. Okay. So, but yeah, basically you can just see it a bit like this. The pattern and collide with this obstacle and destroy the activation. So we generate a goal, so random target position, random obstacle field. We infer parameters that could potentially reach this goal. Originally we have no data, so mostly a random guess. Anyway, we still get a point, reach position, or nothing actually if the pattern is just diffuse. And we iterate like this for a number of time. More visually, it looks a bit like this. So we generate further and further training patterns. This is why also we have a sort of curriculum. So we basically have a hard-coded curriculum to generate further and further training patterns. Otherwise, we have no signal actually to train the model. Something I have to say is that actually we use a differentiable version of Lenia, that was actually proposed in this paper. Just that actually we can compute a L2 loss between this yellow disk and the final position of the pattern and differentiate through Lenia to update the parameters. So actually after each of these iterations, we can optimize a bit for some budget the pattern to approach better the goal.
How do you prevent solutions where the images grow everywhere in the space?
Yeah, so for this, I'm going to try it, but I will ask again. We have a number of filters, right?
Basically, the target is a disk that you can see on the image. It's like a disk of this size.
So you have a penalty
to loss to the
if you're outside of the disk.
So that the pattern has to learn also to be.
Okay.
When you were
Filters are for something else, actually. Yeah.
when you were training this, were you training the parameters of Lenia or the initial condition or both?
So the parameters for sure, the initial conditions as well, no, in this work, huh?
Also.
Yeah, I think so.
It's both.
Okay.
So I think Gauthier was doing. So he has a random uniform visualization in this small square, and we will also kind of train this noise so it will learn to
I see.
be a bit asymmetric.
I had to start it in the right
Yeah, because
direction.
you can backpropagate up to the initial activation, actually.
It also the initialization and the linear parameters, so both.
Yeah. Even so, in most simulation, that's yeah, okay.
Okay.
So. So yeah, so in this video, this is already quite advanced actually in the exploration process. So the patterns already perform quite well, but yeah, you have to imagine that indeed at the beginning, you have patterns that can do anything and explode or vanish totally. So this is what we found with this procedure. So first, we found patterns that basically do what we wanted them to do in the training conditions. So typically patterns that are able to self-constitute their own morphology from an initial configuration, which is usually a square with some structure, that can self-maintain their own individuality despite the perturbation induced by the obstacle that basically destroy their morphology, and exhibit some sort of behavioral functionality in the sense that they are able to navigate efficiently through that obstacle. Interestingly, these patterns, so the same ones, also display interesting generalization abilities. For example, they behave in a consistent manner in a field of obstacles which have different shapes, different size, and so have little to do, let's say, with the type of field of obstacles they were discovered in. They also resist fields of obstacles that have a particular speed and are smaller, so act as bullets. So what is interesting here is that actually this sometimes results in other types of behavioral regimes that were not necessarily present in training conditions. For example, this kind of flapping behavior. They also are pretty robust to asynchronous updates with noise. So here I think the updates are asynchronous, so they happen pixel by pixel, and there is also some noise in the update rule. And it seems that they still behave correctly even in these conditions. If we place several of them in this kind of maze-like map, they not always, but quite often find the exit. So they, yeah, seems like here they are, for example, repulsed a bit from each other, so that probably helps. And quite interestingly, in some cases, we observe some sort of emergent reproduction. So you will see it again near the tip of the arrow here. When two patterns collide, from time to time, it can result in a third emerging pattern. And we think this is actually probably a side effect of self-maintenance, since they collide together, their morphology is quite perturbated. And by reconstituting their own morphology, sometimes it can give rise to a third pattern. There is no path conservation here, so that's why it's free. All right. Some quantitative results. So actually here we were inspired by the type of evaluation which is classically done in machine learning community, in reinforcement learning, etc. So we proposed a battery of tests in order to test how these agents are robust or can generalize well to conditions that are out of the distribution of their training or discovery conditions. And so this distribution of environments involve different types of obstacles. For example, we vary the number, the radius, or the speed of obstacles. Different type of stochastic updates, different perturbations of the initial states, and also change of scale of the entire map, including the pattern itself. And so here what you see are basically robustness score. So how well the pattern is able to still self-constitute, self-maintain, and exhibit the same behavioral functionality in such environments. Darker is better, so 1 is perfect, basically. And so what we see is that they are pretty robust to all these changes, except maybe when the update noise is too high, where indeed then there's nothing much to do. And also when the obstacle speed is too high, it seems that it's too much perturbation to cope with. But otherwise, looks like they are pretty robust. So conclusions on this first part. So we saw that under adequate environmental constraints, low-level local rules can self-organize robust sensory motor agents. That these patterns show interesting generalization abilities to out-of-distribution perturbations, for example, resisting moving bullets. And so next steps, so it's something we have in mind since quite a long time, but we haven't done it yet, will be to use the same procedure to see if we could discover agents that exhibit some sort of learning or memory. And so this is a preliminary experiment where the idea is that the agent is first exposed to a cue, for example, a colored pattern, and depending on the color of this cue, should decide to move left or right, for example. And then training them to actually solve this task and see if it would be possible for the pattern to memorize information about this cue, for example, by changing its own morphology or whatever, and then use this information later on to make the correct decision.
Question. So when you were training for these tasks, did you train it many times? I was wondering if it finds always the same solution or if you...
For this one?
Yeah. If you try.
So I think actually the algorithm, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think the algorithm basically finds a diversity of patterns.
Okay.
And we select the ones that display relatively good performance in navigating obstacles, no?
Yeah, so basically it does diversity search in behavior space.
Okay, yeah.
In the same algorithm, you will find several creatures, and also just by changing the seed, you will also find.
So it changes. There is not like one solution to this problem, then yeah.
Okay. Yeah, but still, per algorithm, you will usually have a relatively small set of morphology. But then if you change the seed, this will lead to
change.
And then we were filtering them out to keep only the high performing.
I see.
Actually, you end up with kind of a phylogenetic tree of creatures, so to speak, in the sense that these goal exploration procedures that I illustrated with the spaces and the crosses, basically each inference and parameter space is based on a mutation of the previously discovered patterns. So there is a kind of filiation between them.
But so this diversity search, you can also do it with a specific reward in mind, or it was a two-step process?
Well, it's a type of reward. Let's say when you generate a goal, in a sense, you generate a sort of reward function, which here was, for example, this target position.
Right. But how do you balance the reward of your reward function with the diversity of the behaviors? That's what I don't understand.
Well, the idea is that each time you select a goal like this, so for example, this type of position.
Okay, you have many different goals. I see. Okay.
Yeah. So for each one, you can compute.
I see. Okay.
A cost or a reward, basically more or less the same thing, and then optimize towards these specific ones. And then at the next run, you generate a new goal that are its own
misunderstood,
etc.
I thought there was one goal.
Yeah.
So, sorry, once again, how did you choose the example result at the end? Was it like you looked at the Pareto curve of all of the best ones, like, and then chose?
Yeah, I think so. Right, we have some score, and then we select this one.
Yeah, basically, yeah. So how we define goal here is like a target this in position in the grid, and we will always initialize matter on the left, and then basically the better one are the one that are where matter is able to reach the farther on the right. So they are the one that locomote faster and in a more robust way. Because of this, they are able to pass through this obstacle. So you could look basically how far they're able to travel, and then we have also other filters to ensure that they are localized, that they are stable over time, and yeah, a bunch of filters that we use to keep only the best ones.
There's also
To be totally honest, there is quite a few workarounds on this method to make it work. But still, there is a proof of existence that we can find this type of pattern in India, which is actually, I think, already a contribution in this type. But then, if you want to look for other types of creature, I guess there will be quite components to fine-tune indeed. Yeah. Quite a few components to fine-tune.
Well, there's a curriculum. First, train for no obstacles, and then further and further, and then obstacle, and also with obstacle further and further.
Yeah.
So it's a learning curriculum.
Yeah. This is also one of the tricks, which is that these goals are set in a curriculum fashion. So first, actually, without obstacle, and we actually place goals. Well, we bias the distribution of sample goals basically, so that at the beginning they are very close to the initial pattern, and so there is actually a meaningful loss to train with. And then we hard-code a curriculum where we put the goals further and further away, up to a point that actually they enter in a field of obstacles, etc. So there is this hard-coded curriculum also.
Did you initialize it with a Lenia glider or random?
Random, yes.
Do you remember how robust the resulting parameters were? I mean, if you perturb the parameters that you obtain, do you get like similar behavior, or is it just very?
Yeah. These are basically, I think, shown here. So, for example, here we perturb the initial state, and so we see that basically they stay robust to these perturbations. Here we perturb the update rules. So I guess we add noise in the Lenia parameters basically, and we see that basically they seems to be quite robust to this. And it's not in the parameters, in the final state. In the activation. We didn't perturb the rules actually.
But I think it was quite sensitive, and that's why gradient descent was really useful, because when we do just random mutation during exploration, it will usually completely kill out. So gradient descent was useful to only vary some parameters, and kind of hard to vary them.
I'm just wondering, like, Bert showed this island of Lenia parameters, and I'm just wondering where this is and how it's connected to others, because there should be like a continuous path that SGD takes to reach this parameter, with increasingly like higher scores.
Probably depends on the size of the landscape, from parameters to behavior and the training conditions. But I can easily, I don't know really, but I can easily imagine that basically if your optimal behavior, so to speak, is, for example, here, and that your training, there is no noise, let's say, in the parameters within the training. Once you have reached your optima, you have no need to actually go in a more stable region. So you will probably stay there. Whereas I think if you train the system in conditions where you artificially add some noise in the Lenia parameters, it will probably favor patterns that are actually robust to this noise and better reach the center of the island, typically.
Yeah, I find this quite interesting because in my experience I have the opposite results. So training cellular automatas in general, both like Lenia-like systems and neurocellular automatas, using like atom and backpropagation, in terms of computation time, they were similar, but in terms of actual optimization steps, it was a lot less efficient than evolution, or evolutionary strategies, more precisely. I think sort of the conclusion around that was that the CA space is very discontinuous almost, very fractal-like. So as you move with stochastic gradient descent, it sort of just jumps around. Whereas with evolutionary algorithms, you have the ability to modulate how many parameters you're changing at once and almost find a smoother path down to your optimal. So I just find it interesting that you guys have the opposite results, where stochastic gradient descent was more robust, or like it was better.
I think we would probably have been in this. We would have had the same issue if we would just have optimized toward one target.
Yeah.
Through event descent. Probably there are many local optima on the path, and it's very rigged, and probably it wouldn't have worked. I don't remember if we tried this actually, but maybe I don't remember. But the fact that actually we rely on this kind of diversity search procedure, generating diverse goals, is a way to escape this local optima.
Okay. Yeah.
Even if like optimizing for this one actually lead to a bad local optima, you might later on generate another one that actually will allow you to make a detour. This is where combining actually diversity search with gradient-based optimization is quite a powerful method.
And I had another question, but this one's, I think, a little bit stupid. But in the view of the cellular automata, high-speed obstacles is almost effectively like noise at the state level. So like at every frame you see, there's just a different random pixel that is turned off.
Why not?
Do you think if you specifically trained it to survive high-speed opticals, it'd get better at resisting noise?
That's a good question. If possible, I would say so, yeah. Well, up to the point where it's physically possible.
Yeah, of course.
But yeah. Yeah, it would be interesting actually to apply the same procedures in different type of training conditions. For example, having speed and size of the obstacles are part of this space, which is not the case. Right. So yeah, that was the conclusion. And so then also the fact that we observed in some cases this kind of emergent reproduction phenomena directly bring an interesting question: is can we bootstrap an open-ended evolutionary process in this type of systems? And so this is what motivated in part these other contributions on Lenia, which is a mass conservative extension of Lenia that enable to localize the parameters of the base rooms themselves and to attach them to pieces of flowing matter. So if one wants to study the emergent open-ended evolution, the previous method seems quite limited in the sense that it requires a target task or a diversity thereof, but at least predefined task space. And it seems that there is nothing like this in biological evolution. There is no such ultimate objective or finality, but instead that evolution is instead driven by phenomena such as eco-evolutionary feedback or niche construction, where basically organisms are not solely the product of evolution, but since they modify their own niche, their own environment, they are also causes of their own evolution and of the evolution of other organisms or species, which is very well explained in this paper from Lala and colleagues on the extended evolutionary synthesis, which I guess some of you know, but otherwise I highly recommend it. So how can we bootstrap such feedback mechanism in Lenia? There are at least in the original Lenia formulation 2 missing ingredients, probably more. The first one is something to compete or to cooperate for. And typically in Lenia, there is a lack of immutable physical laws. For example, no notion of energy or mass conservation in the initial formulation. Been solved in different types of work, but at least in the real formulation, it was not the case. And then we also need to have a diversity of self-organized structure that can interact in a shared environment. And so while Lenia is able to generate quite diverse patterns, the fact that usually the rule parameters are the same in the entire grid is limiting in this respect. And so this is what motivates to introduce maze conservation in Lenia, in a system we called flow Lenia. So in a nutshell, here we interpret activations in the grid as concentrations of matter. And instead of growing, we consider that matter will move in space according to a flow that I will describe quickly in a moment. And so what is called the growth function in the original Lenia formulation is the same concept is now called an infinity map, with the idea that matter will flow toward regions of higher affinity. And so visually it looks a bit like this. So this is standard linear dynamics. You perform your convolution, you apply your growth, you get a new state. And then you can compute gradient basically in this state, like local gradients, and apply this gradient to the previous state as a flow of matter basically, and then literally move matter according to this flow, pixel by pixel. And so since we are only moving existing mass around, the total mass is necessarily constant. And that's the story. So to give, to show a bit how it behaves, these are two simulations of 10 by 10 equal 100 parameters in the original Lenia formulation and the same one in flow Lenia. So in the original Lenia, you observe a diversity of patterns, some of them collapsing, others exploding, some localized patterns as well. In flow Lenia, you get, total mass is necessarily constant, so you get mostly self-organized patterns. There is no explosion, no vanishing. And so this property actually facilitates the discovery of spatially localized structures like these ones that I think were mostly found by manual search, but they are much more present in flow Lenia than they are in the original Lenia formulation due to this mass conservation constraint. They are not all strictly spatially localized. For example, we find a lot of this type of snake patterns also. And then another nice property of flow Lenia is that since we are moving matter around in the grid, we can actually attach any information to any piece of matter, and this information will flow with the matter it is attached to. And in particular, we can attach information that are just the parameters of the deck rule. So for this, we define the parameter map, which is basically another grid, let's say, but that follows the same flow. And then, once we have introduced this parameter localization, this actually directly induces sort of competition for mass at the pixel level. For example, if you have 3 pieces of matter that wants to reach the same target cells, they each have their own parameters. You have to decide what will be the resulting parameters in the target cell. And so this is some sort of competition for mass at for parameters, let's say. We can also easily introduce mutations of parameters, like random mutations in the grid. Usually we use what we call the mutation beams. We select a small region in the grid from time to time, and we add the same noise, the same delta to these parameters. And so this is how it looks like. So here, this is an initialization of the cellular automata with 9 patches, each one with their own parameters. Parameters are encoded by color here. And so if we run the simulation, we observe that indeed each type of parameter results in different types of patterns, but that they can potentially, from time to time, collide with each other. And that can result, for example, in structures that are driven by different parameters.
In this case, which of the parameters do you kind of flow with the...
So these are parameters of the update rule. I think what we do...
For the growth or the current?
No, it's... from what I remember, the issue, so we simulate this in JAX, so we need to keep tensors of the same size.
That's why I was wondering.
And so I think what we do is that we sample randomly or pseudo-randomly kernels, and the parameters are the weights
Of these
of
pre-sampled
kernel
kernels.
base. That's right. Yeah.
So it's like you have, I don't know, 10 kernels, and then you mix and match these ones to.
Yeah, and then we have linear combination of them, and the weights of these linear combinations are the parameters that are actually shown here.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I have a question that I had it since I read it. Doesn't this lead to an equilibrium? Like if you are somehow averaging parameters, I don't know what is the exact formula, I don't remember it, but would you expect that at the limit there would be either not anymore moving or escaping organisms that are all uniform inside, and then maybe they are uniform somewhere else with different parameters? Or do you see something different?
It's unfortunately usually what we observe, that it reaches an equilibrium with a few species, so to speak, or parameters that win the game in some sense and remain quite constant. We have like very recent results that I will show later on, and exploring this more largely, let's say. And we haven't totally analyzed this data set yet, so maybe there are simulations where there are other type of regimes, like for example oscillations or whatever. But on the simulation we have analyzed, I will say a word about this just after, but usually we measure evolutionary activity, which is basically a measure of how much the parameters evolve and can be maintained through time, and it usually reaches a plateau. So
have you,
not open-ended yet.
yeah. Have you played with other methods for combining parameters? Like, I don't know, a random subset of them or something like that?
Yeah. This actually this has a strong influence on the side-time dynamics, is how you mix them here. I don't have a slide about this here, but there are different possibilities here. You can make a random choice. You can make an average, but then you will lose diversity. You can do some sort of crossover dimension by dimension. You can also weight it with the actual flow. So like the cell that has the highest flow will stochastically win it. And recently in the last paper, we proposed another rule, which is called the negotiation rule, that I don't master that much, so I will better look in the paper and tell you about it later during lunch also. I don't know if Sina, you remember the negotiation rule? No.
I don't remember.
Yeah. Well, basically these rules have a strong influence on the dynamics.
This kind of reminds me of one paper from Baricelli, where he kind of had these organisms that if they were to occupy the same spot, they carried this extra code, which was interpreted then as them playing some kind of game, and then the one, like you would have to win the space or like your.
I think this is what happened actually in this the last rule that were proposed by recently by student observers, which is basically there is another map, some kind of a competition map, and so this is part of the evolutionary mechanics to change these parameters, and then basically they compute. Well, there is a computation of another sort of affinity map that has no influence on the moving dynamics, but drive who will win the competition, basically in cases of complex like this.
Yeah, I might have missed that, but how is the color determined here?
So the colors is basically a PCA in parameter space, which I think is 10-dimensional, or more or less, and then plotted RGB.
So colors change as parameters change?
Yeah.
Yes, so I'm not sure this simulation is long enough to see, no, there is a mutation here, you see.
No, I mean, if there's a mutation somewhere else, your color can change because there was a mutation somewhere.
Yeah, you can see one here, I think.
The color is just for us, right? Does not influence the dynamics.
The color is just, they represent the parameters. It's,
see the parameters.
the projection of the parameter space in color space.
No, I mean, if a color changes somewhere else in the space.
No, I think the map is made once at the beginning, and then if you have a new combination of things, then that gets a new color.
I see.
But you can already see like some parameters have similar colors. Like if you're unlucky.
You see that bigger scale here. So same mechanics, but just a bigger map. So this type of interesting dynamics. So this were like more early simulations, but still we can see that in some cases that seem to have more macro structures that are formed from the interaction between more microscopic patterns.
I see. So, like in some cases, you have like combinations of colors, as in like symbiotic kind of relationships. How often do you see that contra just sort of one parameter set taking over?
Yeah, yes, we observe actually quite frequently this time of symbiosis between different type of parameters. You see it here as well a bit, well, just a bit. It's much more present actually, I think, in the next slide. So this is a demo video. It have kind of a pop science feeling, so sorry for this, but still the images are quite pleasant to see. I'm just gonna put an interesting part of it, which illustrates actually quite well the symbiosis. To be honest, we have no idea how to measure symbiosis, but at least we can subjectively observe it. Why there is no time here?
It's in the middle, 1:45.
Ah, yeah, 1:35. All right, thanks. And I cannot accelerate it here. Oops. It's a bit slow. So this was a video that was made by a master student at Flowers, Thomas Michel, for the VCC competition at Alife. So this is a different type of mixing rule, I think, compared to the other one. This was this type of negotiation mixing rule. We added this kind of barriers, like walls, that have the same properties as the obstacle in the previous contribution. The idea here was, well, we didn't test for it, but we thought it could help to make the system more diverse by introducing barriers and sometimes, but still with some small holes where the matter could pass. And so yeah, we observe, for example, this type of structure that seem to be formed of, yeah, a sort of symbiosis between different types of patterns driven by different parameters. So well, there's still a lot to do in this. I mean, we observe a lot of things subjectively, and we are quite fascinated by the system, so we might see things that actually sometimes even not here. How do we actually quantify this? Well, if you have ideas, we take them. Yeah.
I mean, I do have one, which is I would highly suggest you read a paper, I think it was by NASA, called Assembly Theory.
What to say?
Assembly Theory.
Okay.
On it's just the theory on the recursion of self-assembling structures and how you can measure it and how it can indicate towards like evolutionary complexity and.
Yeah, it's from Sarah Walker.
Yeah.
It's basically a method of detecting life that doesn't look like life that we know.
Okay.
So basically, the idea is that you look at like how many steps from like the basic constituents that is available, like basic molecules. How many sort of
recursive steps
do you need to get to the thing you're looking at? So for example, and I think there's like a threshold. So there's like nothing that isn't life has an assembly number higher than some number I don't recall, which is I don't know, like 15 or something.
Yeah.
So it's I know like potentially very useful to detect.
It's also a weighted, so it's a weighted sum of both how many steps it took you to get to a place and of like complexity. It's recursive. So if you have like a single carbon ring, the next step is 2 carbon rings, and the next step is 4 carbon rings.
Yeah.
So it's sort of doubling in complexity every time. But it also measures how common those base components are, and how common the next component is. So you can also measure the curve of your like assembly growth to see how evolvable the system is, or how likely it is to get more complex.
Seems pretty related to actually, so this is what we use at the moment, which is evolutionary activity, proposed by Bedo and then the group, which seems to be a bit similar to this, no? Which, yeah.
I just wonder, because I looked a bit at assembly theory, but it's super hard to transpose to continuous system, because what do you call actually a continuous
Yes, that was the main issue.
Like, there's no way really to apply this to Lenia, I think. I saw some work that was trying to apply it to game of life, and already was super hard, like to define subcomponents of gliders, and they had a whole bunch of approximation for this, but I don't really see an easy way to apply this to Lenia.
Yeah, I think you need like a sort of vision model or a kernel model where you have basic kernels that can detect the base components. But yeah, no, it's very hard.
There's a way to approximate it, yeah. But yeah, that's the main challenge actually, is how do we quantify what happens in the systems? like most methods, or for example, there is this information theory of individuality that could be useful also in that case, etc. But there are theoretical measures that are intractable in this type of high-dimensional spaces. Sometimes there might be ways to approximate them, but yeah, it's the main challenge for now, I think, to quantify what seems, at least subjectively to us, interesting in these systems. So only scratching the surface here, but yeah, for example, evolutionary activity is measurable. Although it seems to mostly reach a plateau, at least in simulation where we have measured it, which is somehow disappointing, but also expected. What is a bit encouraging is this type of representation that Bert showed yesterday already. So basically projection using PCA of the parameter space in 3D. Evolutionary time encoded by color, and so we see this kind of structures reminiscent of trees that suggest that actually there is some sort of implicit fitness in this system where there is no explicit fitness functions. So, or at least not at the pattern level. There is this competition format at the pixel level. So once we have this flow linear system, then well, naturally we want to see if we could have, let's say, the best of both worlds in a sense. So like first contributions, we consider the task like a predefined task space. We apply diversity search methods on it. And then in another type of contribution, flow linear, we don't use this type of algorithm. We just create a system, we run it, and well, we observe what happens basically. So quite naturally, the next step is to see if we could apply this type of diversity search methods to this type of task-free system. So this is what we recently did. So we come back to our automated discovery framework. This time the complex system under study is Lenia. So as usual, a space of input parameters, a space of output behaviors. And I didn't look if there were questions actually before, but no, okay. So here, the input parameters are the flow linear parameters, so the initial state and the localized parameters, as it is visualized there. And the space of behaviors are a set of like system-wide metrics. So we used final evolutionary activity, so the final points of the curve I have shown before, entropy at different scales, measured on the grid. And third one, which is quite interesting, it's the size of the encoding of MP4 video of the rollout. With the idea that this compression can give some cues about the complexity of the simulation.
The question, maybe I missed, but what is the idea of evolutionary activity, roughly?
So yeah, I didn't went into this because I'm not sure there are different versions of it. I'm not sure I totally have it.
But just roughly as an idea.
But basically measure how, in the original formulation, there are genomes. Here there are parameters, basically, so how parameters change through time.
So it's a metric
versus are maintained through time, in a sense.
So it's a metric on the parameters that are in the simulation.
Yeah.
Okay. Not the video or whatever.
Yeah. Okay. You have a more precise definition, but I don't know. Yeah. But typically, like if parameters change all the time, we consider that your system is not that much interesting. They are always fixed the same, and I think
it's in between.
Okay. Something, yeah, like parameters that change but still are able to maintain themselves over time. Might be wrong, but yeah. I will look in the paper as well. So yeah, so these two spaces and then standard procedures as we did before, we generate random goals, we try to achieve them, and we iterate. And this is what we get. So these are the points we discovered in this behavior space with the naive random parameter search method and our goal exploration based method. So we see that basically we're able to uncover more diversity with the same experimental budget in this space.
The question, you were trying to reduce the compressed size or maximize it?
None of them. We were trying to maximize diversity in the behavior space.
Okay, so you had all compressed sizes as target.
Yeah.
Okay,
so basically these are 2D projections of this, I think it's a 7D behavior space.
Okay.
So there are not all there are more entropy measures actually than this.
Yeah.
And so at each iteration, we sample a random goal in this space and try to achieve it. So basically, we try to reach a diversity of all these dimensions. So we can also measure this diversity or the evolution of the diversity through time this way. So these are different measures of diversity, like pairwise distance, grid coverage, and also some that are specialized, well, that are on specific dimensions. So basically, we see that over time, we discover more than random. This is not at zero, so but and also, yeah, it seems that in some measures we haven't reached a plateau yet, so we would like maybe to run it for longer later. And at the end, we end up with this kind of simulation atlas, as it was called in the Hazel paper, for example. So this is typically a U-map of the behavior space, where we project all the simulations discovered by the system. And so Thomas, master student who led this project, did a cool website. You have a QR code there to access it. So basically, online you can navigate this data set. So for example, you can select a projection in the behavior space. Here I select evolutionary activity in X and compression MP4 size in Y. And then you can click on simulations and see the rollout. So here it's low compression, low evolutionary activity, low compression size. Indeed, we see that the parameters that are graded by color don't change much, so low evolutionary activity, and the pattern is quite static, so easy to compress. Then I think another one, just to show that it seems to be consistent with what we expect from these measures.
Are random mutations parameterized in there somehow?
Random what?
You had also random mutations in there, right?
In this one, yeah, there is random mutation there.
Can they be changed from one experiment to the other, or is it a meta parameter?
Yeah.
They are also part of the parameter space, yeah? Yeah, okay, yeah. Thanks. So here this one is, I think, high evolutionary activity, low compression size. Basically, high compression size usually is more noisy patterns that are hard to encode. Low one, more static, and yeah, the expectation and it seems subjectively to be the case. What is interesting is at the middle. So I think this one, no, this one is high evolutionary activity, low compression size, and then there will be one which is more in the middle part of this space. So yes, this dataset is online, so you can dig it. What I'm just thinking about is that we wanted to have a procedure to actually automatically share interesting patterns on social media, but I don't think it's in place now. But yeah, I don't know, maybe you can use the hashtag #FlowLenia if you find interesting stuff. And something we want to do, we haven't done yet, is, so yeah, this is a middle one, basically, so middle evolutionary activity, middle compression size, is to, well, dig this data set, subjectively find interesting simulations, and then scale them up in time and in space to see if, for example, the evolutionary activity we measure has a different, well, doesn't reach a plateau as we saw in earlier simulations. So yeah, there is still much to do also in future work of this one. So to conclude on FlowLenia, so basically FlowLenia introduces built-in mechanisms for mass conservation, parameterizing, which induces computation for mass and also enable random mutations. In some conditions, this results in emergent eco-evolutionary feedback that results in a diversity of self-organized structures. We can explore this type of complex systems with diversity search methods. This can result in relatively large data sets that can be interesting, I think, for the community. Maybe going back to the question, to the point of Sebastian yesterday about what is the North Star of our field. I don't know, collecting just data set could be actually a direction. Probably not the only one, but so characterizing emergent complexity remains a challenge. It's still here for a long time. Okay, your last one, what time is it?
You have 15 minutes still if you want.
Okay. So last contribution, which is also quite recent, which was led by Sina, who is here also today. So in this one, we wanted to, well, it's still on the topic of automatic discovery. Okay, we can discover a diversity of behaviors in systems like cellular automata. And this one, the inspiration, let's say, or at least the a posteriori inspiration, was that quite a ubiquitous strategy to explore uncharted territories is to alternate local expansion with long-run expedition. For example, during migrations, where population extend locally, and from time to time, a subpopulation might travel a long distance to explore certain territories and then re-expand from there. In natural evolution, where basically like genome mutation result in some sort of local expansion in phenotypic space, but from time to time we might have a major evolutionary transition, for example, the emergence of eukaryotes that could act as this sort of long-range expedition and then expand from there. In cultural evolution, same principles through design innovations. So particular designs of a tool can be refined locally, and from time to time there are like disruptive design innovations that can act as long-range expedition. And in computer science, this is also a well-known process. For example, the lady flights that alternate some sort of broadened motion at the local level with straight line traveling as this sort of long-range expeditions. So here we design an algorithm that is based on this alternation between expansion and expedition. As usual, we consider a space of input parameters, a space of output behaviors. Here, the parameters are the parameters of flow Lenia, and the space of behaviors is the clip embedding of the final image of the rollout. So what is nice with clip embedding is that you can project both images and text to it. We start with a number of random samples in parameter space. We simulate them, we project them in clip space. And then we start the expansion phase where we select a previous sample in a clip space that is chosen according to novelty score. So we probabilistically sample previous runs that are highly different from the others, basically, so that maximize novelty. We look at its antecedent in parameter space, we mutate it a bit, and we perform the rollout and project it again. Feel free to correct me if I'm wrong, because it's my own understanding of the system. So then we do this for a while, and we switch from time to time to what is called the expedition phase. So here we start from the archive of previously made discoveries, and we use a vision language model. So what is nice with the vision language model is that you can craft a prompt that include both text and images. And so basically the prompt is along the line of, okay, you are a discovery assistant, your task is to provide interesting goals for a system, more or less along this line, let's say. Here are a few examples of previously discovered patterns. Propose a goal, well, first describe this pattern, I think there is something like this. Describe these patterns in terms of their different properties, and then propose a goal that basically is quite distant, let's say, from this pattern, but still seems realistically reachable along this line, let's say, more or less. So for example, linguistic goals could be something like a photo of a butterfly with red wings and green dot. So in text form, so you can project it, project this goal in text form to the clip space, and use a bit of computational budget to optimize toward it. You might reach it or not, but anyway, you get a new data point that you can include in your archive. Hopefully, it will be further away from the cluster of the ones that were discovered during expansion phase. And then you iterate like this. You alternate expedition and expansion, usually doing much more expansions because they are cheaper than expeditions. So illustratively, this is how it looks like. So here in blue, you see I think cherry pick example of what is discovered during the explosion phase. So you see that there are patterns that are different, but still more or less visually look the same. And from time to time, we perform expeditions. So this is an example expedition, which is this one actually, where the goals that were generated, for example, giving these examples in the VLM prompt with a carefully crafted prompt that encourage to go toward properties that are not in the dataset that is provided to the VLM. And then we perform some optimization with a black box optimization, like CMAS. And so we end up with a pattern that might not necessarily look like the chosen goal, but at least is visually different from what was previously discovered. And then from there, we can re-expand again.
Do you keep the previous objectives? Like, do you reiterate with them, or do you keep them in a pool, or is it always new?
You mean this one?
Yeah, like in this case, the goal, a photo that we branch between these and red berries. Like, do you do it first and then you try something else and forget about it, or do you actually keep it and then some future models can actually use that goal as a try to solve it better or something?
At the moment, it's like each goal is used once. But we definitely thought about this because I had a previous run that we would reuse the goals, and it would find very different solutions for the same goal. So there's definitely utility in even reusing the same goal. But because we were trying to just for the first preliminary results get as much novelty as we could, we didn't reuse them. But with if the budget is big enough, there's definitely benefit in coming back to previous goals, especially if a goal wasn't achieved. So sometimes you don't have the right primitives to load from to reach that goal. So yeah, that's definitely something that we would want to try again.
But aren't some of them also included in the VLM prompt, no?
Oh yeah, and the goals are also included in the prompt at some as they accumulate, so that it has a sense of what goals it tried in the past, so that the future goals are.
Go explore. Oh, sorry. In some way, there's some relationship to go explore. To go explore.
I'm not too familiar. Is that?
I think there is indeed, yeah. Go explore, yeah. It's it's basically it's quite indeed. I think we cite it actually also in the preprint, but go explore. The idea is more like a reinforcement learning kind of algorithm with an agent that navigate an environment, and you set. You try to set a goal which is a previously reached position, and then you. Right?
Yeah, you try to explore as much as you can, but you explore from promising previous states, and then you try to because there are robustify agents to be able to travel again to that point, and from there explore further. Yeah, I think there's some connection there. I think it's a little different, but I think there's some connection maybe there.
I think yeah. I think we cited it actually. Well, I'm not in the valley to say it. Yeah.
So it's not a technical question. Keep embedding space is quite large, right? So I guess
yeah.
you reduce it somehow.
We use the full. So we're just we use the full 512 dimensions of it, and we just compute cosine distances. Although there were problems with that, and we have some ideas how we might, for example, one idea was possibly getting random projections of it and maybe sparse ones. To kind of
searching novelty in a huge space is usually not very efficient.
Yeah, it's so on one hand we found that it kind of worked. On the other hand, it would get stuck in these kind of traps, which it was infinitely novel. But then you look at the image and it's not. So it's kind of adversarially hacking clip by accident. So there were issues with it that we were trying to solve. And one idea that I had so far was just to get sparse random projections that we would change every n steps. Yeah, or something like that, something to reduce it. But we haven't settled on a specific method yet. But yeah, we at the moment we're using the full thing.
So yeah, and so this is examples of goals that seems at least subjectively to be better reached during optimization. For example, this DNA switcher seems like it made a better job at reaching it. Some quantitative results here. So basically analyzing the effect of different hyperparameters of the system, and in particular their effect in the diversity obtained at the end of a run. Interestingly, what is done here is that diversity is computed in clip space, but also in other VLM type of space that are different from the one that was used as a behavior space, and it seems that actually diversity is well maximized in this other type of spaces as well. Maybe the most interesting is this one, so comparing expedition and expansion with novelty search, and so showing that indeed this expedition, so novelty search is basically only the first E, so it seems that the expeditions indeed enable to discover, to uncover more diversity in the space. This is well illustrated by this picture. So this is, I think, a UMAP of all the samples found in clip space. In yellow, it's a run with only expansions, so basically only novelty search. And in blue, the points that are achieved with expedition and expansion and expedition. So we see that basically only expansion, we discover points that are mostly localized in the same cluster in the UMAP, except in some cases where sometimes we can find other clusters and then re-expand from there. But interestingly, when we add expeditions, and so what we can see as red stars are what is reached by these expeditions, it seems that it enables to like escape totally from this cluster and then re-expand from the newly discovered areas. So you might probably have noticed some similarities with the Alife paper that will be presented tomorrow morning. Indeed, there are. I think we more or less had the same ideas at the same time, and the Alife team was quicker than us to publish the results. But so yeah, there are strong similarities in the fact, for example, that both algorithms combine novelty search with language-based target. Maybe an interesting difference of expedition and expansion is that we introduce a self-generation of linguistic goals that are based on previous discoveries and encourage the VLM to make hypotheses about unseed but usable behaviors of the system. And so with an alternation between this local expansion and long-range expedition. Next steps is, well, the key limitation of the algorithm for now, well, an important one is that we only embed the last image, so we have no information about the actual dynamics of the rollout. Actually, Hazel does a better job at this in the sense that it prompts the VLMs at multiple time steps in a single rollout. This type of method naturally suggests to introduce a human in the loop. It's pretty easy, interact in natural language, so the expedition phases could very easily be performed by a human, or at least from time to time, to steer the explorations toward desired directions. And then obviously applying to other domains can be interested other than cellular automata. Okay, let's conclude here. So just a summary. So we have seen that these diversity search algorithms are useful tools for exploring large parameter spaces and to reveal diversity of possible system behaviors. This enabled to, for example, discover parameters that display emergence sensory motor agency or emergence ecoevolutionary dynamics. Mass conservation, at least in the flow linear formulation, directly enables parameter localization, which is a cool feature to have. And also it's possible to couple these automatic discovery algorithms with visual language or any kind of fundamental models to perform like more semantically informed exploration. What can you learn from such simulations? Well, first, that conservation laws seems to be important in the sense that they favor the self-organization of macro entities and in particular of spatially localized patterns, which, if we look for lifelike forms, seems to be an interesting property. And also, they naturally induce something to compete and cooperate for, which seems relevant if one wants to simulate emergent ecosystemic ecosystem dynamics. Interestingly, this low-level competition seems to induce higher-level transmission and selection. So in flow linear, the competition for mass is predefined and built in at the pixel level. However, when we look at the simulation and also maybe when we measure the evolutionary activity, it seems that there is a transmission and selection of more macro-level structure at the pattern level. And that this might actually result at more at the system level into some sort of ecoevolutionary dynamics. So, well, this is still speculative, but there might be a sort of let's say major transition in the sense I described at the beginning in terms of new levels of organizations that emerge from this type of systems. Still speculative. Structured sensory motor behaviors do not necessarily require a body-brain distinction and the inactivist spirit of cognition. So this agent seems to behave like typical reinforcement learning agents, but the main difference with reinforcement learning agents is that they have no predefined sensors, actuators, or decision center. And actually, good luck if you want to spot what is a sensor here. The behavior is mostly the result of local interactions between entities that are all driven by the same update rules. An interesting observation is that self-organized sensory motor agents, well, first, they have interesting generation abilities, as we have seen, both at the individual and the collective level, but also that in some cases, reproduction can emerge as a side effect of self-constitution of self-maintenance, which might be promising for future research into like emergent evolution, let's say. And on the more negative side, but also calling for future work, for now it seems hard to find conditions for ever-increasing evolutionary activity. Also, the fact that we obtain this type of pseudo-phylogenetic is promising. I might actually stop here. These are more like general stuff about the current Alife and AI convergence that we are seeing today, but just to say that this is quite fascinating, and the future of the field seems to be quite bright, in particular to merge a bit different views of cognition, more Alife or AI-based. To say that we are also doing a bunch of other works that you might want to have a look if you are interested at it. And that this was obviously done with a large number of people, the main ones being here. I hope I'm not forgetting anybody. Thanks a lot to Mayalen and Sina that answer more questions than me, so it was useful. And also just to say that two of these people are actually currently exploring their next move. Gauthier Hamon, who just finished his PhD, and Sina, who is here. I highly recommend them if you are looking for good people in these topics. So yeah, you have links here as QR codes to their homepage or publication list. Thank you very much.
Okay, there was already quite a lot of questions, but we have time probably with a few more if people have some more questions.
Okay. This is just a remark regarding that it would be great to have some metrics of complexity of the patterns in Lenia and the assembly theory, because, well, I did not follow it closely, but there seems to be quite some critique, both from chemists that claim that there's assembly index, like there's non-living organisms that contain molecules that are high in complexity according to the assembly index, and both by mathematicians who claim to have shown that it's equivalent to basically just Shannon entropy, and that estimating the assembly index is just compressing something. So I have not followed it closely, but if anyone knows details, I'd be happy to discuss, and I would take it with a grain of salt.
You send me those papers?
Yeah. And it's just on Wikipedia, actually.
Oh, it's just on the Wikipedia. Okay, that's interesting.
Other questions?
Yeah. It's kind of two. So first, you have like the mass conservation stuff is very interesting. Would you have any intuitions for what would happen if you added, maybe not like energy conservation per se in the same sense of mass conservation, but sort of like what we have on Earth, like high quality energy in, low quality energy out?
Yeah, so we tried a bit things in this direction, but it's still very preliminary. Actually, I think this is what is compared here. So I don't remember in which order, but actually this is 3 different versions of Lenia. One is the standard formulations I have described here. Another one is, I think actually Bert mentioned them yesterday, is a food model. So there is a notion of like constant decay of matter, and you need to inject some sort of resources to be able to constitute your own morphology. Another one is a kind of dissipative version where there is basically a sink of matter, and then which is then reintroduced with random perturbation into the environment, if I remember well. So we are exploring a bit these directions, but still very preliminary.
Right.
Yeah.
It's two things. One small rebuttal to the comment you just made. I think the one about they've shown that in chemistry, certain like chemicals and things like that show high assembly complexity, but are considered not alive. I do think it's also the boundary between what is not alive and is alive is extremely fuzzy in the sense of like proteins can be considered not alive, but a collection of them are. So it might still be like a nice avenue to explore. Although the one about the mathematicians just showing it's a information compression algorithm might be more damning. The second one was on the VLMs. What sort of models did you use? Like what size? How good were they? Like how did you ensure they weren't like hallucinating or making up what they were seeing in the image?
So CINA might river better than I said, but just on illegal selenite is not necessarily a problem actually. As we have seen, even if they don't reach their goal, they might still escape some sort of a local minima in terms of diversity that is still interesting to escape.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely optimizing for the sake of optimizing is sometimes good enough to get out of random exploration. So even if it like hallucinates, like you said, it's fine. We used mostly, we were constrained by, I couldn't install some models locally for compute reasons. So I ended up using OpenAI's 04 mini model in the version of the publication. But since I started the project, new models came out. So I started with GPT-4o mini, then just GPT-4o, and then at some point 04 mini, which had some chain of thought and stuff. To do like a sanity check for hallucination, I would save the output. So I forced it to have like a chain of thought for what it sees, what the similarities are in a batch and all this kind of stuff. And I would save these text files. And it was surprisingly accurate, like especially by the 04 model, it was pretty good at actually describing quite in detail what it was seeing. What it lacked, which is something I would like to fix in like a future like follow-up work, is building into the goal generation a curriculum, which at the moment it was bad at doing, despite. Like, just something funny about it is I would tell it to, it would sometimes use really useless words for goals, like a colorful image. And like, okay, every image is colorful. Like, you can stop saying colorful image. And I would ban this word. So I had a list of banned words that it's not allowed to use in the goal. And then it would still use it. So then I had to threaten it. I said, if you don't follow my instructions exactly, I'll die. So, and sometimes it was this threat would work and sometimes it wouldn't. So there were some issues still in terms of like it following the prompts correctly or not. And definitely the quality of the goals could be better in the future. But like Clément said, like it was kind of good enough at the moment to get just some type of optimization, which is it just takes it to a new distribution that the random exploration wouldn't take.
Did you try to do like the Jeff Clune thing of just asking like, is this interesting to the site, just the language models?
I think we started with that. Yeah. Very beginning. It was just say yes to everything.
Really?
Like it's not really saying no, especially because it's like a cellular automata images that it's not super fine tuned on.
Right.
So it was just like, yeah, that's really cool. Yeah, that's great. It's like this romantic kind of thing. And it's like, all right, thanks for nothing. Like I'll.
Yeah.
I can wait.
I mean, and this is more like almost. Okay, I'm just gonna ask it. What do you think about the viability of sort of using the Alife community to set up a massive like data gathering experiments where like people from anywhere on the internet can just look at randomly selected cellular automatas and run if they're interested in this, maybe even put a description, just to gather a bunch of data to refine the VLM.
Like Lenia breeder, like pig breeder.
Like pig breeder from
yeah.
Lenia breeder is not.
Lenia breeder, I think, is not an online thing. No, it was just. But yeah, that would be cool.
It's like a huge repository.
Yeah.
As big as.
In that sense.
We should definitely do that. Yeah, it would be interesting. And it's, I mean, the exploration space is quite huge because you might want to explore Lenia parameters, but there are variants of Lenia popping out every month or so. So then you have to explore along the Gaussian dimension as well, and
yeah. It could be cool though, for sure. I think that would be like the most powerful. Like that's better than VLM for sure. We're just having actual humans. Like. Yeah.
Knowing that the website we have placed online for exploring the data sets we collected in the two last experiments that were presented here. I think if people want to reuse the template, Thomas is happy to provide it. So it can be a first start to at least common templates to explore spaces in the system here. And click on rollouts and maybe share them online also with an ID and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, just a quick comment on that. On this paper that was trying to apply assembly theory to game of life, the cool thing that we have a whole wiki of game of life discoveries since the 70s that have been made by humans, and they were using this like as a comparison to what is interesting and what should a automatic discovery algorithm be able to reach kind of as a gold standard. So it's kind of a small scale equivalent of what you're saying.
Okay. What is interestingness is that it's a non-stationary question. Yeah. Interesting at the time is no longer interesting.
Okay, I think it's time to go for lunch, so let's thank Clément again. So you all know where